What's up, guys? Skippy Africanus here, and welcome back to another Cartridge of the Week episode, this week featuring the well-beloved law enforcement classic, the 38 Special. Which, buckle up, because a round like this is certainly the doozy to get into, which I guess is to be expected from a round that saw nearly a century of service with the United States law enforcement. Anyways, before we get into the history, use, and all that stuff with this legend of a caliber, we will first do what we always do and take a look at the head stamp, which on the top, we have PMC, who was, of course, the manufacturer of this cartridge, precision-made cartridges, to which, side note, this was among the many boxes of ammo that I had bought with that one revolver I believe I purchased around a year or so ago. So I know for a fact that this specific example is their 132 grain loading. Now, going to the bottom, we have 38 SPL for the caliber, of course, 38 Special. And you will notice that little dimple right there on the left side. That's not something that's original to the cartridge, rather it's from said old revolver I mentioned earlier that I had to return due to it having some timing issues. So what that is actually a hammer strike. Yeah, it's not original to the cartridge. I actually got quite a few of those left over in a box. Anyways, the 38 Special has a very lengthy history to it, and it begins with the 38 Long Colt. Now, to keep things short, Colt released their 38 Long Colt in 1875, and in 1892, the United States would adopt it, having it being chambered in the Colt M1892 revolver. Problems would quickly be noticed with the cartridge's very poor penetration, and would be especially highlighted during the Philippine-American War, with it being heavily criticized by all for its complete lack of stopping power. During the war, they would begin breaking out old caches of Colt single-action armies in the older 45 Long Colt, replacing as many of the 1892s as they could on the front. Indeed, there exists plenty of anecdotes of Moro tribesmen taking multiple hits of 38 Long Colt and being practically unfazed, many of which were hits at very close ranges. One particular account comes much later in 1905 by Colonel Louis A. Lagarde, stating Antonio Caspi, a prisoner on the island of Samar, attempted escape on October 26, 1905, and he was shot 4 times at close range in a hand-to-hand encounter by a 38 Colt revolver, loaded with the U.S. Army standard regulation ammo. Now, he was finally stunned by a blow on the forehead from the butt end of a Springfield carbine. Indeed, the 38 Long Colt was certainly not a good choice when it came to military calibers, so likewise, its replacement was actually sought fairly early, with the 38 Special arriving on the scene in 1898. The 38 Special utilized the same parent case as the 38 Long Colt and would initially feature a 158 grain bullet, a bullet weight to which still remains popular to this day. The cartridge initially would be loaded with black powder, featuring an extra 3 grains over the 38 Long Colt. However, within a year, smokeless loadings would quickly begin to replace the ones made with black powder. Now, one thing to be noted with the 38 Special as well as the 38 Long Colt is the name, as both bullets are actually much smaller than 0.38 of an inch, being around 0.357 in diameter, making this and the Long Colt technically 36 caliber projectiles. Now, where the 38 designation comes from is actually the outside diameter of the casing. Much like how we talked about the 44 Magnum, Special, and Russian all pulling their names from the 44 Smith & Wesson American, the 38 Special as well as Long Colt went the exact same route. You see, the 38 Long Colt utilizes the 38 Short Colt as a parent case, and the 38 Short Colt features what's called a field bullet, where the bullet more so sits on top of the casing rather than being completely inside of the casing. And when they decided to place the bullet inside the casing, it thus downsized the projectile. However, they still used the 38 designation as kind of a holdover. Anyways, though the 38 Special was intended to be a much better loading of the 38 Long Colt, it wouldn't end up really being adopted. Though it would be close to it and would indeed see plenty of military service, the 45 ACP would end up being the mainstay cartridge to truly replace the 38 Long Colt. This, however, was most certainly not the end of the 38 Special, so now quite a few cartridges that we've gone over on this channel ended up being denied use by their intended audience. And with that, you would tend to see a drop in popularity regardless if the cartridge became popular again later on. You would see a drop in popularity with the cartridge. However, when the 38 Special was rejected by the military in favor of the 45 ACP, it was already still a wildly popular cartridge with plenty of former soldiers who ended up carrying one, firmly backing the caliber as a light shooting yet at the same time potent round. In the 1920s, law enforcement would begin to see itself being commonly outgunned by organized crime and sought to replace their standard single-action revolvers with double actions, and to add to that, have them featured in a caliber that provided for better penetration against stuff such as metal car doors and the likes. The 38 Special already having a stellar reputation as well as being featured in plenty of double-action revolvers and having great penetration capabilities, would begin to be adopted en masse by law enforcement across the country. Fairly quickly in the law enforcement use, Western Cartridge Company would begin developing a specialty loading for law enforcement use, featuring a 200 grain round-nose Lubaloy bullet. The new loading would be so named the 38 Super Police, and other companies would begin to experiment with 38 38 Special variants made specifically for law enforcement, featuring a wide variety of different cartridges. Now, as automobile bodies became thicker and thicker, demands from law enforcement specifically on metal penetration would become an increasingly common demand, with cartridges being made throughout the 30s featuring a little lighter loading in the 158 to 110 grain ranges and featuring things like metal tips, steel jackets, higher velocities, and the likes. And through these experimentations with these higher velocity loadings would also arrive at the .357 Magnum in 1934. Now in warfare, the 38 Special would find use by plenty of US soldiers, tending to be from pistols they purchased on their own. However, as mentioned, it was never formally adopted as the mainstay pistol of the US military. This does not mean, however, that it wasn't totally adopted to some capacity in smaller roles. Since World War II, it wasn't uncommon for airmen in particular to be issued with guns like Smith & Wesson Victories or the rather interesting Colt Air Crewman, which, aside from having an aluminum frame, also featured an aluminum cylinder. Now, there were plenty more different variants of 38 that would be produced by both military and law enforcement during the cartridge's long history. However, some interesting variants were the tracer rounds that would be given to pilots along with their standard ammunition with the purpose of being used as backup rescue flares. Now, the 38 would begin to be dropped by law enforcement in the 90s, and while it's stated that there is still a tiny few departments that use revolvers chambered in it, I couldn't really find any specific examples. Despite this, however, the 38 Special still sees plenty of use in self-defense handguns as well as for hunting. And one area I especially see it used myself is with competition shooting, as the few guys that run revolvers at the various pistol matches I go to tend to go with the 38 Special given its flat shooting and low recoil. Now, speaking of guns, it should come as no surprise that such a cartridge with its long history and many upon many loadings is also featured in quite a wide variety of guns, and given guns chambered in .357 Magnum or Maximum can shoot .38 Special, this only increases the number of guns that can be found capable of taking the cartridge. Now, they tend to be, of course, revolvers, and there are plenty of lever actions capable of taking the round, and though not common, there of course exist the options of single-shot rifles and pistols in the caliber as well. Perhaps the weirdest gun in the chambering has got to be the Smith & Wesson Model 52, initially developed for the US Army Marksmanship Training Unit and in a weird caliber called .38 AMU. The pistol would eventually be tweaked and rechambered for .38 Special and sold to the civilian market as a high-end target pistol that, although it was never produced in high numbers, turned out to be a very well-beloved pistol by those that used it. And if a .38 Special semi-automatic handgun sounds crazy, it was also spec'd out to use .38 Special wad cutters as well. Overall, just a very weird and interesting pistol. Now, we've talked about the history, use, and all that such of the .38 Special, but what exactly are the specs of this legendary caliber? Well, the cartridge, as mentioned, uses the .38 Long Colt as a parent casing and features a .357 diameter bullet. Loadings, of course, vary wildly, with some being as light as 100 grains all the way up to some 200 grain bullets. Though on average, you will see stuff like 110 to 158 grain loadings with some outliers like these 132 grainers in the middle. The velocities, of course, vary, especially when you account for +P and +P+ loadings, though for your average loads, you will see bullets flying in around the 800 to 1100 FPS range. Of course, keep in mind, given the nature of the cartridge being in both revolvers and lever actions, you can see some differences in the same cartridge FPS-wise, all depending on the type of gun it's being fired from. But anyways, I think that is going to do it for this week's Cartridge of the Week episode featuring the legendary .38 Special. I hope y'all enjoyed the video as much as I personally enjoyed making it, and I will see y'all next time.